Do you want to become a CFO and take control of your career? Our podcast series from Go to CFO will give you a unique insight into what it takes to become a successful CFO. Hosted by the three amigos at AXR Recruitment and Search, myself, Greg O'Shea, and my colleagues Kunal Gupta and Nick Constein, we speak to inspiring and successful CFOs from our network as they share their career journeys with us. It's the closest thing you're going to get to delving into the mind of a CFO. We hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to today's episode of Go to CFO. My name is Nick Constein, Associate Director here at AXR Recruitment and Search. Today we are joined by Andrew Just, CFO of Australia at Inghams. Before stepping into his current role, Andrew spent over 30 years building an impressive career at Nestlé, holding leadership positions across Australia, Fiji, Switzerland, and Singapore. Throughout his journey, Andrew has navigated complex transformations, driven cultural change, and delivered results in diverse and challenging environments. In this episode, we'll explore what it takes to lead finance through change, the transition from being a career Nestlé guy to the new kid on the block, and how to build trust and collaboration within a team, and the personal resilience required to manage an international career. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrew. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Nick. Very good.
Yeah. Well, look, I really appreciate your time. I know we caught up a few months ago, and the initial conversation I thought was such an interesting journey, you know, having lived in multiple areas. And so we'll get into that in a minute. But just to kick things off, where'd you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your life.
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. I grew up in Sydney's North Shore. So I went to the local high school and schools there. I did a bit of surf lifesaving, a bit of work experience around. But I guess one of the most formative things during that time was in year 10, everyone does their work experience. I was lucky to have 2 weeks with the corporate affairs manager of a listed ASX company. And they, at that time, happened to be organising the 24-hour car race down in Bathurst. So I kind of got thrown into organising a race, but it was an amazing opportunity. I got trusted with quite a lot as a 16-year-old kid. But Jim, who was the corporate affairs manager there, my boss, really was one of the first mentors that I had in my career. And, you know, that certainly has continued throughout. I've been really lucky in that sense. I was thinking about this after our last chat. And, you know, I still have the letter that he sent me at the end of the 2 weeks that sort of summarized a number of things about my experience. There was some good feedback that I got to read, but also some things about just some principles that you can apply in your life. And I think particularly around empathy, but also just getting along with people. Like you can have the best ideas, you can be the smartest person in the room, but if you can't get along with people, you're not going to be able to get very far. And I think the other thing he talked about was the being lucky. And at the time, you know, you sort of read it a bit, okay, what does that mean? But over time, you realize how much of a part that plays. And there's plenty of things that you can do around writing well, speaking well, studying hard, working hard. Yeah, of course. Yeah. But you still need to have that luck that goes with it as well. So that was sort of, I guess, one of the first formative things in my life from a career point of view. That's
an amazing way to kick off your journey, because then you started directly after uni and you went to Nestlé.
Yes.
So can you give everyone a little bit of a high-level career overview?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started in Sydney in the confectionery business, doing the basic accounting stuff, you know, doing graduate holidays. And I guess, you know, I really developed commercial execution focus and an interest in that part of the business, you know, partnering with people that are making the business tick and really understanding, and that curiosity that went with it. You know, if I think about different roles, you know, stepping into them, really building trust based on strong communication, really important, and collaborating with people. I think also flexible. So, you know, moving around quite a bit. You talked about international, but, you know, my first move was down to Melbourne, which felt like a lot at that time from Sydney. And I ended up doing a couple of those moves. But then, you know, over time, you know, I was expressing an interest in doing roles overseas, and those opportunities started to pop up. The first one in Fiji, and then some time in Switzerland, and then other opportunities in Asia over time that were really, really interesting from my point of view. And obviously was allowing me to build up responsibility, but also understanding the cultures, being curious, getting to know things, how do things work, it doesn't work there, it does work. Kind of getting that experience was really, really useful. And I was also lucky in terms of the sense that, you know, I eventually found my way into audit. And here you kind of are going, okay, 4 weeks, you're going to be here. You're identifying, you've got a bit of an audit manual, but there's quite a bit of scope for understanding, you know, what the business is really doing, what's the key issues here, how much time you spend during that time. And so, you know, being quite interested in that sort of stuff, I moved into different categories, channels and understanding. And I guess that came well aligned with my personality of, you know, getting into the details of things and sort of working my way through. After audit, and maybe it's we'll talk about it in a little bit on Fiji. But then I also had an experience to work in a joint venture with General Mills. So the breakfast cereal part of the business is through that joint venture. So I had a General Mills boss living in the Philippines, and we were able to deliver some really good results, but also keeping a network alive within Nestlé at that time. And that was probably the first role that gave me a bit more the tax legal responsibility. You have many shared services within Nestlé, and that joint venture meant that, you had to actually understand those elements and obviously represent both partners equally. So
not easy.
Yeah, it wasn't.
That's not a feat for everyone.
It wasn't. And then, look, most recently at Inghams, a publicly listed ASX company, really enjoyed the transition to Australia and the opportunities in this business. I mean, it's obviously poultry in Australia, you can think is relatively straightforward, but within literally hours, you start to understand how many metrics there are, how many
absolutely
elements to the business, and really the fast-paced nature of it. And I really enjoyed that part so far.
Yeah, Inghams is incredibly complex. I think people don't understand the supply chain, manufacturing, operations, commodity. Like, it's very complex. It's very interesting. So I'd like to go back to start, if you don't mind, talking about your first big leadership role in Fiji as CFO. What was that like for you professionally and personally, moving from Sydney and Melbourne and then going?
Yeah, so it was rather humbling, I must say, because, at that time I was in audit. So I was in my mid-20s. I just finished kind of my two years in audit doing different sites. And the last audit report I'd written was on Fiji. And I thought it was a pretty good report, but it was probably a bit harder when you then get asked by the CFO of the Oceania market to basically, look, I think it'd be great for your development to go to Fiji and implement everything that you've written in your audit report. Very quickly you learned that some of those things were maybe very good and as you thought, and others were maybe not quite as good, and you needed to apply a lens of practicality to it. I then had the pleasure of my team coming back, or my old audit team coming back and auditing me about 8 months later, which was also a fun, humbling experience as well. But that was probably how I got into it. I sort of did have a bit of a playbook because I'd had that benefit of 4 weeks with an audit team identifying key issues. And I did use that very much to sort of work my way through. But I tried to stay as open-minded as possible about what might be different to what had been told to the auditors. When you're actually there working, people obviously have a different level of trust with you, and things, some were what we expected and other things were maybe a little bit less of a problem, or there were some others that were maybe things we needed to focus our time on. I was also super lucky in that CFO at that time, and also my boss back in Sydney, really supported me. I felt that, this was an opportunity I was being given, and I got, regular checkpoints and had the opportunity to bounce off ideas. I felt they were sort of always a phone call away, and, maybe I called them a couple of times in 6 months, but it really helped having that support.
Yeah, great sounding board. Amazing.
In that experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And it must be just different culturally, like working in Sydney, working in Melbourne, and then landing in Fiji. Yeah. Sure. Like, I would imagine there would be some significant cultural changes. Yeah,
there were definitely, the work ethic was different. So it's not to say that people weren't working hard. They were, but it was different. So you would, the story I've probably told a few times is, we were doing the monthly close, which is important in a multinational. It has deadlines and they exist whether you're in Fiji or you're in Sydney. And, the first one we did was we were struggling. The second one, the power went out on day one and there wasn't really any indication it was coming back in the office for a couple of days. So we ended up, needing to do it out of the lounge room of my house that just happened to have better power supply than the office. But, you obviously get those things done. You have people that are working and supporting and working together. But I think, the underpinnings of that trust and a high level of communication, I think it applied equally there as it did in other cultural aspects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that experience of being in Fiji or having that first international assignment really kind of kicked off the appetite or maybe introduced the possibilities of having an international kind of career?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely it did. I mean, I enjoy traveling. Yeah. We were chatting about it before about just, taking trips with the family. So naturally I did enjoy that part of it. And then, as, other opportunities came up, they were in places that suited me and eventually the family as well. And they were jobs that were interesting and, not necessarily the easy path, but, they were good, challenging roles and really enjoyed that opportunity to move around. But I think, that openness to them was probably the thing that triggered it. And, seeing how the experience in Fiji went kind of kept me pretty open-minded to what other opportunities could be.
Yeah, of course. And then I'm curious to understand your experience of moving to headquarters.
Yep.
Like, obviously, everybody's perception is multinational is like the decisions come, closest to the sun.
Yep.
So I was just curious, from having worked in the Australian market, obviously, and then Fiji, then going to headquarters, what was that like for you?
Yeah, so it was also a really good experience. The role I had there was a group project manager. So it's like an internal consultant. So I had the benefit of having worked in a few different countries and businesses, which was useful and I think helped when I was talking to different stakeholders in different countries in that project. But you also realized, certainly at the beginning, there was a scope of what we wanted to do around the organization design. There was a one source of truth initiative on data and reporting side. But what you certainly felt at the beginning, it was a bit slower to get some of that momentum coming through, not because things are slow there, but more just you realize the number of stakeholders you have to convince or keep informed or take on feedback. And certainly that breeds a better outcome by having those inputs. But at the beginning, you kind of feel like you're talking to everyone and it's not really going well. But eventually you find that turns into a far bigger and broader impact if you can get it right.
Yeah. And I want to ask about your mindset in that circumstance, moving to different markets and you're so even going to Fiji or Switzerland or any of the places you've been, how do you prepare mentally for stepping into a new market?
Yeah. So I think hopefully it's coming through. This curiosity is definitely something. So I ask a lot of questions when I'm starting and try to get to know the people, start to build a relationship. And I think that's really important. So talking to people and being curious to understand. There'll be some things that you see that sometimes you can kind of have a bit of a bias to, the next 2 steps of that are like this. Sometimes it's really good in those early times to pause and have a few more conversations just to make sure that it is exactly what you're expecting and not potentially something else.
Yeah.
So I think staying pretty humble in that regard as well and being open to what might sound like exactly may not be. And other times it is exactly the right thing to do. So I guess getting that judgment right. And I also talk to people in my network as well about things that, again, it's not every day, but there are certainly times where it might be something that's particularly new or challenging or something not going the way you're wanting to, and just leveraging mentors and being able to talk to people. And particularly in a big multinational, you have a lot of people that you come across that have gone through these moves and have experienced it. And I really valued that and lent into those conversations.
Oh, it's great. Like, why not ask someone who's done it before? It's a great way to do it. And I guess that would tie in on how to managing your personal life, because I imagine it's quite difficult when you move around. And so what was that like for you? Because you moved kind of from Australia to Asia to Europe, Oceania. Like, how did you manage the personal side?
Yeah. So that part was challenging. I met my wife. She was New Zealand born wife. I met her in Australia when I was living in Manila in the Philippines. So I guess I had to be quite flexible in terms of, when you met people and we kind of caught up and our relationship kind of continued. And then I moved back to Australia and it allowed our relationship to sort of further a lot more.
Yeah, of course.
So I guess there were times where there was flexibility, and then there were times where, I was interested in a role in Australia, and, that obviously formed into our relationship. But when you think about, my kids can speak French, they started school in Switzerland, like there are benefits along the way. My wife also grew up, moving around quite a bit through different countries. And I think it does bring quite a bit of resilience into the kids.
Of course.
But also hopefully some language opportunities that they have for down the track as well.
Yeah. And what do you think would have been the hardest relocation that you've done?
I think the hardest one was actually moving back to Australia.
Yeah.
And a couple of people had told me that, and I'd sort of thought about it, but I was just sort of thinking that, you're kind of moving home in a way. So you would, of course, be across everything, but you feel a little bit like a tourist in your own house. And, people do treat you a little bit like that to begin with, but, it doesn't last forever. And it kind of, you move through it quite quickly. But it was interesting at the beginning because you knew where things were. Some things had moved. You knew where your family was, and you knew, where your, extended family was. But it wasn't as easy as we were expecting at that beginning.
Yeah. And interesting. I think anytime you move is hard, but I think I can relate, I've been here 11 years.
Yeah.
And I think moving back to Miami, I would be a tourist in my own town. A client asked me, I'm going to Miami. What should I do? I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
I was like, I'll call my parents, I'll call my brother. I have no idea. I think I can totally understand and relate with that concept.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I agree.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of your leadership style and how you build kind of impact and strategy within the businesses and kind of going through that process. So what do you do, or what strategies have you used to firstly build trust within the teams that you are inheriting, and then also like fostering the collaboration within those teams?
Yeah. So I guess in terms of that building trust quickly bit, starting out being humble, like don't pretend you know everything when of course, yeah. Well, in my case, I definitely don't. And be curious, but also be clear in the communication, which can be hard sometimes at the beginning because you are trying to be curious and understand, and being clear can be difficult because you're also forming your ideas a little bit.
Yeah.
So often I've tried to, again, not always getting it right, but tried to be a little bit reflective and then, try and summarize a bit more clearly, in time rather than in the moment. But I think also that candor around what you're seeing and playing back what you're seeing can be really helpful as well, because it is then you're kind of developing the trust with the people about what you're seeing. You're talking about it. It's not like you're hiding from it. You may not be that open at the beginning about what to do about it because that may be forming. But I think just the candor around feedback and things that you're seeing, not walking past them, I think they're really important in building that trust. And also empathy, which, I think that's probably something over time that has developed further. I'm not sure I would have had the best empathy when I started in Fiji. I'd like to think, yesterday I have much better empathy in that space, and just trying to appreciate and understand what someone is going through, and, that may be they're trying to do their best and they're struggling in a particular area that you can help with, or it could be some other aspect that you could take a roadblock out that could help them. Just trying to understand more about what needs improving, what helps them get things done. I think they're really things that can, again, develop that trust with the people that you're working with.
And I guess from your previous experience, how do you balance driving the organizational goals of executing whatever is needing to be done versus a team that maybe they don't have the capability or they never had the leader to show them how to do it? Like, how do you manage the messaging from headquarters to your team?
Yeah. So I think you have to, at the start of it, be honest about what's coming through and what we're trying to achieve. So I think that first part, I think there can be a tendency sometimes to kind of try and wrap it up in something different. So I think the honesty around what we're trying to achieve and why is really important. So, as a leader, really, if it's not available, because sometimes it's more, this is what we're doing, but certainly getting that why clear in your mind. And I think that's really, really clear. I think here in Australia, I do think there's this sort of, people can see through the BS quite quickly. Yeah. But I think also in other cultures, I've seen that in place as well. So I think just trying to be as clear around what the goal is, even though it may be a difficult one for us to achieve, is really the key starting point, and then getting people around it to try and deliver the best result.
I guess that ties into that change management element that you talked about when you're at Nestlé and you're going through a change initiative, and you said you had to gather everybody. It's like turning around a cruise ship. It's not easy. Yeah. But once you get that momentum, so what would you suggest to people on that change management element? What are the topics that you would suggest?
Yeah. So the thing that, I got this feedback, so I hope that was one of the things that kind of pushed it, was certainly that humbleness, but also then making sure I was asking different people about what we were proposing. So it didn't just become, here's what we're doing and, best of luck.
Mandated.
It became more, there was a process that we sort of went through. My boss at the time had really been keen to make sure that this, was done in that style of collaboration, knowing that was the way that you really keep things in place going forward, rather than just sort of being put in place and kind of reversing back out. So I think that really helped. And there were forums that we had for that. So, be it calls where you had different markets that you were talking to about a particular topic, a particular next stage, a particular next step. And then there were ones where there were smaller groups where you might be working with the finance team of country A, and you're going through, look, these are the proposals, and trying to make sure that worked effectively with those team structures that they had in place. Yeah. And again, staying open to it. I think that would be the key ones.
Did you see yourself or catch yourself changing your management style depending on the market, or like the type of role that you were in, coming in, I don't know, internal audit versus, working as a country leader?
Yeah. I don't know if I think maybe it's maturity. So whether that was but I did catch, I think as you get more comfortable with things, and maybe that's a maturity part. Yeah. But I think there's a tendency to be less offended by stuff that might happen. And so, early in your career, kind of getting that feedback might kind of knock you a little bit, and you get a little bit offended and you respond in a different way. Whereas I guess I had the experience of knowing that, what that particular leader who was well respected and who I'd worked with in other contexts and knew wasn't just going to be putting up a red sign for the sake of it. Sure. Kind of then means that you do look into, well, what are the consequences of that? Does that change here? Is that different, structure wise, et cetera? Mm-hmm. So I do think there was a bit more of that that was the openness I was trying to sort of talk to, that I think that was definitely there. So I definitely noticed that I was more open to, okay, there's some feedback. How do we build that into what we're trying to achieve? Or is that a longer conversation because it's not actually what we're trying to do? Because there could be both. Sometimes it was, yeah, that's really valid and we should build that in. And other times it was, well, perhaps these are some other things to consider in moving that forward.
It's a good way of putting it. So with change management concept and everything that's happening nowadays with technology and AI, it's a bit of a hot topic, but I was just curious to get your perspective on how you see that impacting your current business, but also more broadly, the finance landscape.
Yep. So I think definitely it's going to have a big impact, and it's already having an impact on the organization. I think just trying to learn from it and use it in your day-to-day. And I think, given transformations are happening all over, just leveraging those tools as you go through them, I think is going to be really, really important.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, on the transformation. On the day-to-day, I think they also have a really big role to play.
Yeah. I think the two areas that I would focus on if I'm working in finance are controls.
Yeah.
Concern about people putting information in large language models. That scares me.
Yes.
And two is seeing it as a aid versus as a replacement.
Yeah.
And I think obviously the repetitive tasks are going to be replaced. It's just the nature of the machine learning. But I think there's a lot of doomsday thoughts on the whole world is going to be replaced by robots. Maybe one day, but we're very, very far from that, I think.
There was a podcast I was listening to recently that was talking about they were, to your point, almost doing something that you just physically wouldn't be able to do because you'd need an army of 300 people doing 2 years of work.
Yeah.
But it was like a big company saying, well, we're looking at the master contracts with AI and then going and looking at the invoice in a country and checking that there's alignment, because you can imagine, complexities of contracts, the rate in a country may be different.
Of course. Tax implications,
all
pricing.
That sort of side. So again, to your point, things that just probably wouldn't have been thought of because they just couldn't, the sheer volume wouldn't have made it practical. Whereas now you can do it not within 2 seconds, but maybe over a day can certainly be something to consider.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's cool. And so I just also want to circle back to a point where you talked about having leaders. When we first initially kicked off this episode, you talked about you've been very fortunate to have a good mentor group.
Yeah.
So wanted to see what that was like for you in terms of, were you a career planner? Did you know that you wanted to be CFO and then you're reaching out actively to your mentors and saying, how do I get here? Or what was that like?
Yeah. So look, early in my career, definitely. So, you kind of start to put, well, you're here and, you kind of draw this linear line. But I pretty quickly learned that that's not how any career works.
Correct.
And so, again, I benefited from talking to people that talked about, well, let me tell you about the highs and lows. And you kind of start to build that into your mindset as well. I've been super lucky that I always had an annual career development discussion. Sometimes it was more frequent, but typically every year. And I guess that allowed to sort of fine tune what that plan looked like. I guarantee what I drew in 15, 20 years ago is not the exact outcome. And there's certainly, I guess, how you deal with those ups and downs is really important. And I think, again, just sometimes really there's a mentor I was talking to recently that was reminding me that it wasn't really about me. And it is. There's sometimes where there's things that happen in your career that isn't about you, and just being able to reflect on that. And there are also times where you might take something particularly hard. You missed out on a job or a promotion or something, and you look back a couple of years and see how inconsequential that would have been. So I guess just trying to not be too elated on things and not being too sad is probably a good way to approach it. And just, making sure you're learning from those things, because in some of those ones that were maybe harder, I learned some of the best lessons of my career. And, it certainly helped me into the next role or into something that became better over time, which was not that easy to see right at that moment. But, having people that you can talk to that have had that experience, have gone through those different elements, I think really gave me a lot of strength.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. There's no escalator to the top. I think people, it's not linear. And that's why we do this podcast, to be quite honest with you, is because we've interviewed people who move to operations, who move into even sales in finance, and then essentially move back into a finance role, having a better understanding of how the other parts of the business tick. And they still made it to CFO. They didn't have to go through the kind of traditional method, I guess.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And so I guess the question I have would be more around the opposite side of that. So are you mentor to a few people? And I guess broadly speaking, how do you develop, those future leaders within your team?
Yeah. So I think I've mentioned it quite a bit. I've been really lucky with the mentors that I have, and I've been mentoring a number of people that have, gone into senior positions as well. I do try to apply, I guess, what I'm benefiting to
Of course.
those conversations as well. And, sometimes that might be on a particular topic, or in other cases, it may be a more broader, career discussion or something like that. For people that I'm working more directly with, that obviously I can influence the outcome, I do certainly look for projects or, special initiatives that we could be working on, or, if there's a particular part of the business that could benefit from an outsider being on secondment to help in that area.
Of course.
But I certainly look for those sorts of opportunities. And again, just finding out about people, having the chance to have a coffee and learn more about what's making them tick, what their career goals are, has, certainly over the years has led to some really good opportunities being made available. But, it's not necessarily just because we had a coffee that there was a good opportunity. It's certainly looking for, skills that are being demonstrated and the potential coming through, and, trying to find suitable opportunities that can tap into that and develop the person further.
Yeah. And so when you start at a place, like a perfect example is you're at Nestlé, you knew the business inside and out, and then you come in, you're the new kid on the block at Inghams. What do you do when you start? Like, do you have a 30, 60, 90-day game plan, or how do you evaluate the business, the people, and kind of the goals, and how do you manage that?
Yeah. Fortunately, a mentor sent me the 90-day book just before I started at Inghams. So I did have some ideas around those first 30, 60, 90 days, but I did stay pretty flexible to it. I did at the end of the 90 days have a look back, and many of those things had been applied. But it is around the topics you just mentioned, identifying the team, understanding the people in that team, the development, the roles that they've had in the past, what skills they have. So certainly there was an element around that. And there was also an intensity from my side to get to know the business as well. So I guess moving around it had helped me a bit in terms of, breakfast cereal is not coffee, is not infant nutrition and pet food. So I guess having that mindset of trying to understand, what are the business drivers of that particular category were then helpful, because I did spend a lot of time trying to get my head around that. And as people in Inghams that will know, I still am spending time trying to get my head around some of the metrics and the concepts and the links and the drivers and those aspects, but just staying very much true to that and starting to go beyond finance as well. So, there's people that in the finance team have done this for a number of years, understand the business really, really well. We have experts throughout the business that also understand the business really, really well. So again, just trying to understand more with them, and not necessarily does that lead to agreeing on everything, but certainly having a basis of understanding and a respect with each other, I think has been really important in making a start in a new business. How
did you find the transition from a multinational to an ASX?
I think it's a bit what I was just talking through. I think it was that it's different. So you go from having, a lot of services that you can lean on, and some I maybe had an interest in, like treasury was one where I had an interest in it. And therefore maybe I understood a bit more about it. But at the end of the day, there was a treasury team that looked after your currencies that you dealt in through the business. Whereas now that's very much in focus for the role. So I have enjoyed that as well.
Yeah.
I guess, the bit I'm making is, you go from having some things that you can lean on to having they're in your responsibility. You get to make the call, and you get stuck with the consequences as well. And again, it's just, I guess I've tried to get up to speed quickly again with those things in the role.
So the last kind of portion of the podcast we always talk about is your reflections and lessons learned throughout your career.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've had a unique career, having worked in many different markets, then coming back to your home country. So looking back, what advice would you give your younger self before starting this journey?
Yeah, I would say it's probably the one I got in that letter, back in year 10, was really the getting on with people, being respectful, because obviously there'll be times where there's challenges or disagreements, and be lucky. And there's plenty you can do about the first two, not as much about the third.
Yeah. It's a great way to frame it. And I can't believe you got such wise advice as a 16-year-old. Like that's quality. I hope that you stayed in touch with that person. That's an unbelievable say. And do you think that having had those mentors in your career and all, that's been the kind of secret sauce to staying resilient, or, where you can have that conversation if you're having a difficult time?
I definitely think so. I think there's a strong chance that how I would have showed up would have been different. And so having the ability to bounce off something and, kind of reflect on it was definitely key. And I think, over time, you also, even just sometimes preparing for that discussion can calm the mind and sort of put down exactly what really is important. And sometimes you even find, it doesn't even really register.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe let's talk about something else when I'm catching up with that person. So I think that really is key. And just having that discipline to be being prepared for that conversation often, deals with a lot of those things that.
Yeah, you organize your thoughts, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, play it back to yourself. If you don't feel comfortable with it, then it probably isn't as big a deal as you maybe started out thinking it was.
Yeah. And so how do you balance life outside of a very demanding role?
Yeah. So I think, your family and friends you can kind of sometimes take for granted. And it's something I've certainly struggled with over the years. Moving overseas, meant staying in touch with friends was sometimes harder, but certainly I tried to keep those connections and, coming back. That has been one of the benefits of having a good set of friends that we've been staying in touch with over time. So I think really that's important. But I think also, spending time with your family, making sure you've got that time for quality with your family, having hobbies, getting sleep, all those things that you hear about are really important. But I do think, you need to make sure you're looking after yourself, because obviously if you're not, these things that maybe not so big in themselves become bigger things. And so I think, over time, that's been really something I try and make sure that's every day or every week, try and keep some time for those things that are not related to work. And I think makes me stronger at work.
Yeah. And do you find that your definition of success has changed over the time that, maybe versus the start of your career versus now?
Yeah, I think probably deep down it was the same, because I think success to me is really about enjoying the challenge, improving the things, making progress as a team, developing people and seeing them be successful. But probably earlier in my career, it was more, we've got this agenda to get done and get it done type of thing.
Course, yeah.
So I think it's probably reflecting on that. There's probably more that you can get done when certainly when I'm enjoying what we're doing, what we're trying to achieve. I think that really does bring out the best in people.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you're not doing the hard things, but it does mean that you've got, that good level of support across the team and organization.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a good conversation, such an interesting journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the insights from our network of inspiring finance leaders as they share their journey from Go to CFO. If you're looking to make the next move in your finance career or build your team, get in contact with the team at AXR Recruitment and Search today. We are passionate about building careers, not jobs, teams, not just hires. If you enjoyed the episode, hit the like button and subscribe today. See you next time.